So what happens when the very people sworn to uphold the law are the ones who seem to be breaking it? That's what we're digging into today. We're going to explore that fine line between a lawful order and government overreach. And the most important thing you'll learn is this. The law? Well, it's your shield, but only if you know how to use it. Okay, so let's just dive right in with a big one. A question that a lot of people have when they see federal agents in their communities. I mean, it's a tense situation, right? It feels legally fuzzy. So what's the actual answer?
The answer is a very clear, very simple no. It is perfectly legal. But, and this is a big but, the reasons why it's legal and what happens when that right gets challenged by the very people you're filming, well, that's where it all gets complicated. And that's exactly what this explainer is all about.
All right, so where does this right to film the police even come from? It's not just some vague idea or a good suggestion. No. This is a right that's literally baked into the foundation of the country. And frankly, it's one of the most powerful tools we have for accountability.
Here's the deal. Your right to record comes directly from the First Amendment. It's all tied up in your freedom of speech and freedom of the press. You see, the courts have said over and over again that you have a right to gather information about what your government is doing. And when officials are on a public street doing their job, they have no reasonable expectation of privacy. And this isn't some fringe opinion. Look at that list of circuit courts. That is a massive consensus.
And you have to listen to the way the courts talk about this. They don't just say, oh yeah, it's legal. They use words like a basic and vital liberty. They call it fundamental and virtually self-evident. What they're saying is that our ability to watch and record our government isn't just a nice to have. It's absolutely essential to living in a free society. So you'd think, with all this solid legal backing, that'd be the end of it, right? Well, not quite. Because even with the law being clear, the government doesn't always play by the rules. In fact, you see them push back, trying to claim authority they just don't have. And here is a perfect example of that pushback. You have the Department of Homeland Security trying to reframe filming as doxing. They're trying to scare people. But let's just call it what it is. It's a scare tactic, and it flies directly in the face of what the courts have ruled. They're basically trying to invent a crime to stop you from exercising a protected right. So this is super important. How do you know when an officer is giving you a lawful order versus when they're just overstepping? This chart breaks it down beautifully. Look, they can tell you to step back for safety. That's lawful. But they can't tell you to leave the area entirely just because they don't want to be filmed. That's overreach. Knowing these distinctions is absolutely key. And it's not just about what they say or do physically. The courts have even ruled on this. An officer shining a bright flashlight into your camera lens specifically to block you from recording? Yeah, that's a violation of your First Amendment rights too. You know, this whole power struggle, it isn't just about filming. Not at all. It plays out in all kinds of day-to-day interactions with law enforcement. Let's look at a couple more common examples.
Okay, let's play out another scenario. An officer walks up to you on the street and says, "Can I see your ID?" A lot of us would probably think, well, I guess I have to. But do you? The answer, like a lot of things we're talking about, is it depends entirely on the situation. See, an officer can't just demand your ID for no reason. If it's just a casual, consensual conversation, you are totally free to say no thank you and walk away. They only get the right to demand your ID if they have already lawfully detained you, which means they need to have a reasonable suspicion that you're involved in a crime. It's not automatic. Have you ever heard the phrase contempt of cop? It sounds like a real crime, but here's the thing. It's not. It's just an informal term for when someone gets arrested because an officer felt disrespected. They'll often use some vague, catch-all charge like disorderly conduct to punish you for exercising your freedom of speech. And I mean, the Supreme Court could not be any clearer on this point. You have the right to verbally challenge the police. That freedom to question authority, to even argue with it, is, in the court's own words, one of the main things that separates a free country from a police state. So yeah, challenging a cop with your words is protected speech. It is not a crime. And this is where that pattern of claiming unearned authority gets even more serious. Let's look at how police handle protests and what they do with private property. During protests, police sometimes use this tactic called kettling. It's really something. They completely surround a crowd, block off every single exit, and then they get on the loudspeaker and order everyone to disperse.
Of course, no one can leave, and that's when they start making mass arrests for failure to disperse. It's a way of manufacturing a crime.
And guess what? The courts have said again and again that kettling is illegal. In fact, the NYPD just had to pay out around $13 million to protesters they trapped and arrested this way. That's not just a slap on the wrist. That is a massive financial admission that they broke the law.
Okay, now let's talk about something that is, frankly, shocking. Civil asset forfeiture. This is a process where the police can take your property, your cash, your car, even your house, based on the allegation that it was involved in a crime. And here's the kicker. They don't even have to charge you with a crime.
And get this, in a staggering 80% of these cases, the person whose property gets taken is never, ever charged with a crime. Think about that. The government just takes their stuff, and then the burden is on the citizen to fight in court to prove their own property is innocent. It completely flips innocent until proven guilty on its head.
Now, this isn't just a problem with a few bad apples on the street. This pattern of government agencies reaching for power they don't have goes all the way to the top. Let's look at a couple of huge, recent Supreme Court cases that prove it.
Remember the CDC's nationwide eviction ban during the pandemic? The CDC claimed its authority came from a 1944 law, a law that was designed for things like quarantines and pest control. Seriously, they tried to argue that a pest control law gave them the power to regulate the entire national housing market. Well, the Supreme Court said absolutely not, ruling that an agency can't just invent massive new powers for itself out of thin air.
And this one is huge. The Supreme Court just put an end to a 40-year-old practice called Chevron deference. Here's the simple version. For decades, if a law was vague, federal agencies basically got to decide for themselves what it meant. They got to interpret their own authority. Well, the Supreme Court just said no more. From now on, the courts, not the agencies, get to decide what the law actually means. That's a massive shift in power.
So what does all of this mean for you? I mean, we've jumped from someone filming on a sidewalk all the way up to the Supreme Court rewriting the rules for how our entire government operates. What's the common thread that ties all of this together?
Here's the bottom line. Government power is not absolute. It is constantly being tested, challenged, and redefined. And you know what the best check on that power is? It's us. It's an informed public that understands its rights. The law is an incredibly powerful shield, but it's only as strong as the people who know how and are willing to pick it up and use it.